Hello and welcome to another episode here on my channel. My name is ChaosMole, and today we want to cover why Warhammer 40k Darktide is not just a copy of Vermintide. This is the sentiment I'm seeing much more coming up as of recent, where people are saying, hey, I just saw a trailer of this looks quaint, but it really just looks like Vermintide in the Warhammer 40k universe, and this video is about why it isn't. Now, before we are jumping into it, let me make a few things clear here. First things first, the footage you are seeing here is the footage which have already been out there by magazines and by influencers who were actually able to play the game, and it is not my footage. Second, everything I'm going by is publicly available information, trailers, lengthy gameplay sessions, developer interviews, developer live streams, developer blogs, and so on and so forth. So the information is already out there, and this is what I'm going by. So I don't have any super secret information. You probably have never heard about it. If you have been following this game on a daily basis, you kind of know what you were getting into, but then you wouldn't probably also say it's just a carbon copy of Vermintide in the Warhammer 40k universe, right? Right. So let's get right into it. The first reason why this game is very different is it puts a lot of emphasis on the range fighting. Yes, there's melee, as you can see in the background, and I think Fat Shark will never put away with the melee system because it is a really good melee system. Like the melee seems to be very close to what we have seen in Vermintide, and why would they put this away? But it is important to note that shooting seems to be much more important on the enemy side as of on the player side. Like, one of the biggest giveaways for that is if you are just looking at the amount of ammunition the player has available to them, right? Like in Vermintide, of course, there was range fighting. There was also a good choice of weapons, and there was a good amount of ammunition like lying around, but most of the focus in that game was on the melee fighting, and most of the range fights basically happen for like special occasions or special enemies coming at you, but you can clearly see here how they're using their range weapons against normal enemies. And I think this will be a pretty big change in the pace of the game, right? The moment you have range weapons, and well, also the enemy has range weapons, things will change quite a bit. And of course, we will also have more weapons in general. I think we have already seen a lot about this in trailers or even in the live streams where developers basically showcase like all the different range weapons which are available to all the classes. Like we have the rifles, we have the shotguns, right? We have the pistols, and many more things we haven't even seen yet, or they have already been hinting at. Right. And again, that would change the pace of the game and how we are playing every round, because now we are focusing much more on the range weapons. Of course, this may change a little bit when we are getting in the higher difficulties, where you have to be much more conservative with your range weapon. We have to see how they are tackling that exactly. Again, as I said, in Vermintide 2, you could be very liberal with your ammunition on the lower difficulties, but then the tougher it got, the more you had to think about, okay, when do I use my ammunition and when is the right time on doing so, because you had like a tough enemy or like a tough fight coming up where you really didn't want to go into melee range, right? So we have to see how this works in Darktide exactly, because we haven't really seen like the higher difficulties yet. And that would definitely be interesting. Now, speaking about special enemies, this brings us to the next point. Enemy variety seems to be much broader. Like, let's face it, Vermintide 1 was mostly Left 4 Dead. Like, all the special enemies were mostly Left 4 Dead enemies, and then we had just like hordes of enemies coming at you. Vermintide 2 added a little bit more variety to it, but it seems like in Darktide they are completely leaving behind most of the special enemies we have already seen since Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 over a decade ago, or nearly 2 decades ago at this point. Man, I'm getting old. But it is very important to point out, because what we have seen here is we have our normal horde enemies, right? And then we have seen Imperial soldiers. We have seen like Chaos followers with tougher armor, And then we have also seen like special units, which are not just, again, like all the enemies we have already seen in the Left 4 Dead games. It seems like there is still like an assassin enemy somewhere running around. Like it seems to be like a dog type from what we have seen. But what they seem to have removed is basically the enemy which grabs you and then tries to drag you off, right? This was one of the enemies which really annoyed me quite a bit, because it might be kind of fun to fight those type of enemies when you are playing with your friends or with a group which is coordinated, but the moment you are playing with randoms, you are screwed, because randoms do not necessarily react as quickly as a group. And we had moments where when you jumped off somewhere, right, and you cannot go back to it, like one person jumped off 2 seconds later, literally, got grabbed by one of those drag enemies, and then they're dead. You cannot save them. They're gone, right? That was never really fun. And again, in this game, I think it would be a bit problematic, because you are now a lot of range fighters, right? Like you are fighting at range, but the moment you are getting dragged and you're getting dragged into the monster hordes, it's really tough to come back from that, right? And I was never really a big fan of that type of enemy, and it seems like they're now gone, and they have new types of enemies in the game, and there seems to be quite a bit of variety. Like you can see here the flamethrower enemies, or just normal ones with a little bit of armor and range weapons. Like, enemy variety looks far more interesting, and that's great, because the problem I had a little bit with Vermintide was you had those arenas where a lot of cool stuff was happening, and it became really intense. But in between those arenas, there was not much going on. And you were always just looking out for like the super special enemies, but you didn't really care for the smaller ones. And, well, it seems like, at least from the footage we have seen, that is now over. The next thing, which I really think is a great addition, is the team play. Wait. What? Have you ever played Vermintide 1 and 2? Team play is one of the most important things in this game. Without team play, you are screwed. What are you talking about? Now, of course, I know that team play existed before and is a very integral part of the series, but it's also a problem. Because, as I said before, when you are playing in a team, or you're playing with friends, team play is relatively simple to manage. The moment you are playing with randos, it can become a disaster, and it becomes really annoying. And so the question was probably, what can they do to, well, make you play as a team, and not having people just wandering off the whole time and not sticking together and then getting picked off one by one. And I know what people will say here, well, that's a learning process. They have to learn it the hard way, that you are not allowed to do that. Well, thankfully in Darktide, they didn't go that route, and they actually thought about a gameplay process on how they can reward team play. And you can see it here on display when you are looking right next to health bar of the characters, and you see a little 4 there, plus the colors right next to the bar, and that tells you that you are nearby your teammates, and your energy shields will regenerate. Yes, energy shields was basically the way on how they reward the team play, because that's new. That wasn't in Vermintide. There are no energy shields. And now the energy shields will deplete before your health is getting attacked. And you can see how the energy shield is regenerating much faster or much slower, depending on how many team players are around you. And that is a fantastic way to teach people, stick together. Don't split off, especially if it's not necessary or you were getting murdered, right? And I think through the energy shield, that is a fantastic way of doing it. I'm loving the idea, right? Like, having an energy shield in general is a great addition, because let's be real here, especially on the higher difficulties. If you got hit and it was just an accident, right? Like you were playing really, really well, but you sometimes have just moments where you get hit. It just happens. And then you realize, shit, this is over. Like, I got hit, I shouldn't have get hit, and I don't have any health, I don't have any way to regenerate right now. I am screwed because the next big wave is coming, the next big special monster is coming. I do my team because I just got hit once or twice, and it was just an accident, right? It always happens at some point, and this game is now, thankfully, giving you the ability to do a few mistakes, but then thanks to the shield regeneration when you're close to other players, you have a chance to come back from that. And that is really important, and I think they did a fantastic job on doing this. And yeah, that's great, in my opinion. Now, the fourth and last point, why Darktide is not just a Vermintide copy, might be a little bit controversial. I can already see some people in the comment section will go very aggressive on what I will say next. So please let me know what you think about this, but just be nice, okay? We are all like people here, we can all talk and have a discussion normally. But the fourth reason why I think this is not just a copy of Vermintide and this is good for the game is Darktide will be a live service game. Again, I am fully aware what I just said. I'm not a fan of live service games because the reason for that is too many live service games have just screwed it up over the years. They released in a very questionable state. They weren't as fun as they should have been, and they felt rushed, not finished, and it felt miserable. Like, one of the big draws of live service games is the idea that basically every new addition to the game is completely free, and they are financing this over an item shop where you can buy only cosmetics. But unfortunately, we have seen over the years that we are sometimes getting completely bare bones games, and then the new additions to the game is just stuff which should have been there from the beginning, or they're not just selling skins in the item shop. Right? So I'm fully aware of what I just said with, I'm looking forward to this being a live service game. But let me explain why I think that it is a good thing. The reason for that is, I did came back to Vermintide 2 just a few days ago. And I was like, hey, you know what? I think I need some DLCs. So let's go on the Steam store and let's look up the DLCs which are available, and let's read some of the Steam reviews to determine like which of the DLCs I definitely need and which are just a flavor choice or something which you don't need at all. And the problem is every DLC was like that. Every DLC people told me, this is crap. No, this is not important. This is personal preference. There was not a single DLC where they told me, oh yeah, this DLC totally worth the money. You should get this immediately. It's super important. And in the end, I didn't buy a single DLC. I just ended up with not buying anything and just used the base game because I wasn't really sure which one I want. And I already feel like I'm missing out on something, and I am missing out on some maps. I'm missing out on some heroes. And I feel like I'm left behind, and it definitely lowered my interest to return to the game. Because you feel like you have already missed out on so much. And if I'm not putting down a lot of money, I will never be able to keep up again, right? And so the idea to say, okay, folks, everything we are doing here in this game is completely for free, but we have an item shop where you can buy some skins, I think is a pretty good way to do it, especially because I always also felt like as if Vermintide was one of those games which should have had much more content. There were a lot of players playing the game, especially at the beginning, and content production could have been more. Like, it feels like they have never fully used the full potential of events maps, heroes, items, and stuff they could have given us, because they always had to think about how to monetize it instead of just producing the content, and they know that there's already an item shop in place where you can just finance the game through buying some skins and, of course, hopefully looking cool. But I think this is one of the most important additions, which would be helpful to the longevity of this game. Right. And this is why I truly believe that Darktide is not just a Vermintide copy. There are meaningful changes here, and the game will probably play relatively different, just alone for you being a range fighter most of the time and not just the melee guy at the front, or at least that's what it looks like, right? We have to see how it would go after like 200 hours of playtime, of course. But I will probably update this video at some point when we have played enough of the game, when the game is coming out, or when we are now going into closed beta, which is on the 14th of October and going to the 16th. And we are finally getting like some deep dives on what to expect from the game. So I might update this after I have played the beta for quite some time. But speaking of which, there will be more Warhammer 40k Darktide videos coming out in the next few days and weeks. And then, of course, when the closed beta is going live, you will see much more content here. You will see guides, you will see walkthroughs, you will see just some raw gameplay giving you first impression if you didn't get into the beta or whatever. For whatever reason, you cannot participate in it. So if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate if you leave a like. And again, if you're new to the channel, you want to see more Darktide content here on the channel, make sure to subscribe. We're also streaming here on YouTube from Monday to Friday, starting at 8 AM East Coast time, which is 1 PM UK time and 2 PM Central European time. Playing a lot of Grounded right now. We are also doing gaming news and trailers. And then, of course, the closer we're getting to Darktide, you will see a lot of Darktide here on the channel. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I hope to see you next time.